Fine, let's start. Number 1. The Nazca Tridactyl Mummies. Picture a small, pale body laid out on a table in front of a national legislature. It has an elongated skull, hollow oval eye sockets, and only 3 long fingers on each hand. In September of 2023, that exact scene played out in the Congress of Mexico, and the world has argued about it ever since. The bodies first appeared in 2017 near the Nazca Desert in Peru, promoted by the journalist Jaime Maussan through an online platform. Promoters gave them names, calling them Maria, Josefina, Victoria, Albert, and a tiny one called Wawita. Each body is coated in a fine white powder called diatomaceous earth, known locally as cascao. That detail matters because the powder does 2 things at once. It preserves soft tissue in the dry desert, and it hides seams, glue, and joins from the naked eye. Peru's Ministry of Culture moved quickly, condemning the bodies as likely looted and possibly built from real ancient remains. The forensic archaeologist Elsa Tomasto Cajigao, along with Peru's College of Archeologists, denounced them as manipulated assemblies of genuine pre-Hispanic bone. So here we already meet the central trick of this entire genre. The most convincing fakes are not made from nothing. They are made from something real. Radiocarbon tests cited by the promoters returned ages of roughly 1700 to 1800 years, which is exactly what you would expect from authentic Nazca-era human remains. That is not evidence of aliens. It is evidence that real ancient bone was used. In 2021, Peruvian customs at the Lima airport intercepted 3-fingered dolls packed in cardboard boxes, ready for shipment. When the bodies reached the Mexican Congress, Navy doctors and forensic specialists ran computed tomography scans, and promoters claimed the scans showed eggs inside. The UNAM astronomer Julieta Fierro countered that the scans showed assembled objects, not single living creatures. Maussan himself carries a long history here. In 2015, he unveiled the so-called Roswell slides, which turned out to be a photograph of a child's mummy in a museum. So how do we sort the theories? The mainstream forensic view holds that these are dolls, recombined from llama bone, bird bone, and human bone, fixed with glue and resin. A second view, rooted in the looting crisis, sees them as a criminal industry exploiting real graves for profit and spectacle. And the fringe view insists they are genuine, non-human beings, whose DNA, they say, is 30% unknown, though no peer-reviewed genome has ever been published. The story drew hundreds of millions of views online, which tells you something about what really powers it. Keep that white powder in mind, because the same logic, real material disguised as something impossible, is about to reappear inside a rock that ruined a saw blade. Number 2. The Coso Artifact. On February 13th, 1961, 3 rock collectors were hunting for geodes in the Coso Mountains near Olancha, California. Their names were Wallace Lane, Virginia Maxey, and Mike Mikesell, and they ran a small gem and gift shop. They picked up what looked like an ordinary geode, a hollow nodule that might hold pretty crystals inside. The next day, Mikesell tried to cut it open and reportedly ruined a diamond saw blade on something hard buried in the center. Inside was not a crystal at all. It was a small ceramic cylinder, roughly 2 millimeters, about 0.08 of an inch across, wrapped around a thin metal shaft with a hexagonal sleeve and what an X-ray showed to be a tiny spring or helix at one end. To anyone in the 20th century, it looked uncannily like a corroded spark plug. The fringe interpretation arrived fast. Writers claimed the surrounding shell was a true geode, 500,000 years old, based on assumptions about fossil shells in the crust. The Creation Research Society and the writer Ron Caillet promoted it through the 1960s as proof that the geological timescale was wrong. Then, in the late 1990s, 2 investigators named Pierre Stromberg and Paul Heinrich examined the evidence for the Pacific Northwest skeptics. They compared the object directly with collectors from the spark plug collectors of America and identified it as a champion brand spark plug from the 1920s. The geode was not a geode. It was an iron concretion, a lump of hardened clay, rust, and minerals that forms around metal as it corrodes. Here is the key fact that unlocks several finds on this list. When iron rusts in wet sediment, the corrosion products cement surrounding grit into a hard shell, and that shell can form in decades, not eons. So, a spark plug lost in the early 20th century could be wearing a convincing stone coat by the 1960s. The half-million-year claim, crucially, rested on no radiometric dating of the concretion at all, and the Olancha area had been mined and traveled since the 1800s, giving any modern object an easy way to end up in the dirt. The artifact itself was never preserved for independent study, and its location today is unknown. That word, unknown, is going to keep coming up. The mainstream theory says lost spark plug plus fast concretion. The creationist theory says impossible ancient manufacture, and a softer ancient technology theory says, well, maybe someone was making fine machined parts long ago. The 1999 Stromberg and Heinrich report remains the standard answer. But notice the believer's escape hatch. The object is lost, so it can never be fully tested, and a mystery that can never be closed never quite dies. Hold that thought, because the next object is a hammer that looks fused into rock far older than California. Number 3. The London Hammer. In 1936, near the town of London, Texas, a couple named Max and Emma Hahn were walking beside Red Creek when they noticed a piece of wood sticking out of a rock nodule. They carried it home, and years later, the family cracked the rock open. Inside was an iron hammerhead, roughly 6 inches long and about 1 inch in diameter, still attached to a wooden handle that had partly turned to stone. The handle's surface had begun to petrify, taking on a dark, coal-like character. In 1983, the creationist Carl Baugh acquired the hammer and displayed it at his Creation Evidence Museum in Glen Rose, Texas. Baugh argued that the surrounding rock belonged to the Ordovician or Cretaceous periods, which would make the hammer up to 400 million years old. A 400 million-year-old hammer would, of course, rewrite the entire human story. Analysis of the head showed it was about 96% iron, with traces of chlorine and sulfur, and notably without the nickel alloying you often see in modern industrial steel. Believers seized on that purity as a sign of mysterious metallurgy. The geologist Glenn Kubin offered the decisive counterpoint. The age of a concretion is not the age of the rock layers it eroded from. The nodule around the hammer is a secondary deposit, material washed out of older Cretaceous rock and re-cemented around a far more recent object. We already met this mechanism with the Coso Artifact. Dissolved minerals in groundwater precipitate around an iron object, and within years to decades, they can lock it inside a stony shell that looks ancient. The hammer's design, meanwhile, matches 19th century American miners' hammers, the kind that would have been common in 1800s Texas. No radiometric dating has ever been performed on the iron or the concretion to establish a real age. And iron, as a rule, does not survive hundreds of millions of years in the ground. It oxidizes, flakes, and ultimately vanishes. The fact that this hammer is barely rusted argues for youth, not antiquity, and the low rust is explained by the protective mineral coating around it. So the theories line up much like before. The mainstream view says a lost 19th century tool, naturally cemented into local stone. The young Earth view says proof that humans and ancient rock coexist, collapsing deep time. And a lost civilization view imagines some forgotten people forging tools in an age before they should exist. The hammer has never been released for neutral destructive testing, and it sits in private museum custody, which keeps it out of peer-reviewed reach. Like the spark plug, it survives partly because it stays just out of science's hands. But what happens when the rock really is ancient, genuinely billions of years old, and the strange objects come straight out of a working mine. For that, we travel to South Africa. Number 4. The Klerksdorp Spheres. In the pyrophyllite deposits near Ottosdal, South Africa, miners have pulled out small, rounded spheres that look unsettlingly machined. The rock they come from, a soft stone called Wonderstone, formed roughly 2.8 to 3 billion years ago, deep in the Precambrian. So unlike the spark plug or the hammer, the host rock here truly is ancient beyond imagining. The spheres range from under an inch to about 4 inches across, colored reddish-brown to dark, and the most famous of them carry 1, 2, or 3 parallel grooves running neatly around the equator. Those grooves are what make people gasp, because they look like the work of a lathe. In the 1980s, Rolf Marx, curator of the Klerksdorp Museum, helped bring them to public attention, and the fringe author Michael Cremo featured them in his 1996 book on forbidden archaeology, presenting them as objects too perfect to be natural in rock that old. The geologists John Cairncross and Bruce Cairncross studied them and reached a clear conclusion. They are natural concretions, mineral nodules built from limonite, pyrite, and hematite that grew inside the sediment. The grooves, far from being machined, correspond to fine layers, or laminae, in the original rock. Where the sediment was banded, the growing concretion picked up a matching band, and weathering later carved those bands into raised lines. Similar grooved spheres appear elsewhere, including the Moki marbles of Utah, so the Klerksdorp spheres are not unique at all. Several dramatic claims attached themselves to these objects over the years. One said they were so perfectly balanced that they could only have been made in zero gravity, supposedly confirmed by NASA. NASA never confirmed any such thing, and the story traces back to a misquoted anecdote. Another claim said they were harder than steel and could not be scratched. In reality, they can be scratched by steel, and many specimens are not even truly spherical, but flattened or lumpy. They are not metal, they are mineral aggregates. And nowhere on them has anyone documented a seam, a tool mark, or an alloy consistent with manufacture. So the theories sort cleanly. The mainstream geological view says natural concretions with weathered sedimentary banding. An intelligent design view says they are signatures of a maker in impossibly old rock. And an ancient machining view imagines lost technology shaping ball bearings billions of years ago. The legend grew from a 1979 magazine article and spread through fringe books, while the museum still displays examples, keeping the wonder and the tourism alive. The spheres at least exist, and you can hold one. The next mystery is the opposite. Its central objects supposedly vanished from every museum that ever touched them, leaving only a story. Number 5. The Dropa Stones. The tale begins in 1938 with an expedition into the Bayan Har Mountains on the border of China and Tibet. According to the story, an archaeologist named Chi-Pu Te found rows of graves holding small skeletons with unusually large skulls. Buried with them, the account says, were 716 stone discs, each about 9 inches across, with a hole in the center and a fine spiral groove winding outward. That groove supposedly contained microscopic writing, and around 1962, a scholar named Dr. Tsum Nui translated it to tell of beings who crash-landed from the sky and could not get home. It is a thrilling story. It is also, almost certainly, an invention built layer by layer. There is no documentary record of a Dr. Tsum Nui in any Chinese academic registry. The account spread first through a 1960s Soviet science fiction magazine, then through a 1978 book called Sun Gods in Exile, credited to a researcher named Carol Robin Evans. That author was later admitted to be a fictional creation by the book's editor, David Agamon, whose real name is David Gammon. No Chinese university, no professor, and no excavation report has ever been found to anchor any part of it. Every photograph offered as proof actually shows ordinary Chinese ritual objects called bai discs, jade or stone rings with a central hole that are genuinely ancient and completely terrestrial. The Banpo Museum in Xi'an was sometimes named as the home of the discs, but the trail there collapses on inspection. A claimed 1974 vibration test by an Austrian engineer named Ernst Wegerer is likewise uncorroborated. What makes the hoax durable is the same kernel of truth principle we keep meeting. The Dropa and the Ham are real, small-statured peoples in the region, which lends the legend a thin coat of plausibility. And the bee disc is a real artifact form, so a photograph of one looks convincing to anyone who does not know better. The image of discs that hum or spin like records slots neatly into the ancient astronaut media of the 1970s, the era of writers like Erich von Däniken. So weigh the theories. The mainstream view says this is a literary hoax, assembled from unverifiable sources stacked on one another. The ancient astronaut view takes it at face value as a record of a crash landing, and a middle view suggests a real but mistranslated artifact, a genuine bai disc dressed up in fantasy. Tellingly, no authenticated Dropa disc has ever been placed on public display anywhere on Earth. The objects vanished because, in all likelihood, they never existed. But the next case is the reverse problem. Here there are thousands of physical objects, and the man who made many of them eventually told the world exactly how he did it. Number 6. The Ica Stones. Near the city of Ica, in Peru, a vast collection of dark andesite stones turned up, each engraved with crisp line drawings. From the 1960s, a physician named Javier Cabrera d'Arquea gathered roughly 11,000 of them. The engravings are astonishing. They show humans riding dinosaurs, performing what look like heart transplants, peering through telescopes, and gazing at maps of continents. Cabrera argued they were made by a lost civilization he called Glyptolithic, tens of thousands of years old, and he built a private museum in Ica to display them. There is a much simpler explanation, and it came from the people who made them. A local farmer named Basilio Ushuya admitted that he carved many of the stones himself. He described his method plainly. He used a dental drill to cut the lines, then aged the surface with a paste of chicken dung and heat to fake an ancient patina. In 1973, he confessed to reporters that the stones were forgeries, and then later recanted because admitting forgery protected him legally, while the stones still sold to tourists. That legal angle is the real engine. In Peru, selling genuine antiquities is illegal, so carving fakes was a clever workaround. The forgeries also give themselves away in the details. The dinosaurs are drawn in outdated mid-20th century poses, dragging their tails along the ground, exactly as old textbooks and films once depicted them, and not as modern paleontology reconstructs them. No Ica stone has ever been excavated from a datable archaeological layer under controlled conditions. And because andesite is solid rock, not organic material, it cannot be radiocarbon dated. Only the surface patina is debatable, and Ushuya showed how easily a fresh patina can be faked. The sheer number of stones, thousands upon thousands, points to a carving cottage industry rather than a vanished ancient culture mass-producing them. Yet the wonder survives. The surgery stones, showing organ transplants centuries before modern medicine, remain the central marvel that believers cite, and Cabrera's museum is still a tourist draw in Ica today. Creationist groups embraced the human and dinosaur scenes as supposed proof that the two coexisted, so the theories split familiarly. The mainstream view says modern tourist trade forgeries, confessed by their maker. A lost civilization view says a forgotten people recorded impossible knowledge. And a suppressed truth view says the establishment buries what the stones reveal. The closest cousin to this case sits in Mexico. The Acámbaro figurines, clay models of dinosaurs and humans together, which investigations likewise judge to be modern. The Ica stones at least are objects you can pick up and turn over. The next sinister find is stranger still, because at its heart there may be no object at all, only a rumor of giants and a story about who supposedly buried them. Number 7. The Smithsonian Giant Skeletons. Across the 19th and early 20th centuries, American newspapers carried dozens of reports of enormous human skeletons, said to stand 7, 10, even 12 feet tall. Many of these reports clustered around the great burial mounds of the Ohio and Mississippi valleys. A central document people cite is the Smithsonian's Huge Mound Survey, published in 1894 under the researcher Cyrus Thomas, which cataloged thousands of mounds and the bones within them. Out of all this grew one of the most enduring conspiracy theories in archaeology. The claim is that the Smithsonian Institution found giant human skeletons and then systematically destroyed or hid them to protect a tidy, standard version of human history. The modern version of the story got a massive boost in 2014 when a website called World News Daily Report published an article claiming the Smithsonian had been ordered by the Supreme Court to admit it destroyed thousands of giant skeletons. That article was pure fabrication. The site is a satire and fake news outlet, and no such court ruling ever happened. The hard facts cut against the legend. No human skeleton over roughly 8 feet 11 inches has ever been verified, and that record belongs to Robert Wadlow, a documented modern man with a glandular condition. Many of the old giant reports came from exaggerated measurements, from decayed bones misread in the field, or from outright newspaper hoaxes invented to sell copies. The Cardiff Giant of 1869, a carved gypsum statue buried and then discovered, had already primed the public to believe in giants. In the mounds, bones were sometimes laid out end to end or measured together with grave goods, inflating the totals. Some giant bones later proved to belong to mastodons or other large animals. The Smithsonian itself has repeatedly stated, plainly, that it holds no giant human skeletons. The writer Jason Colavito has traced the myth's roots to 19th century mound builder racism, the false idea that Native Americans could not have built the mounds, so a lost race of giants must have. The story thrives because the real history of mound excavation genuinely is tangled and poorly recorded, and because antiquarian collectors really did lose and scatter authentic Native American remains. So the theories divide. The mainstream view says no giants, only hoaxes, errors, and misidentified bones. The cover-up view says the establishment hides the truth, and a religious view ties the giants to the Nephilim of biblical tradition. No peer-reviewed study of bones has ever confirmed a human in the 10 to 12 foot range. This is a find defined by absence. The next one is the opposite. It is a real object, and the science behind it genuinely works. Number 8. The Baghdad Battery. Outside Baghdad, near a site called Kujut Rabu, archaeologists recovered a small clay jar that would launch a century of debate. It was reported in 1938 by the German archaeologist Wilhelm Koenig, who directed the laboratory of the National Museum of Iraq. The jar is about 5 inches, roughly 13 centimeters, tall. Inside sits a copper cylinder, and within that an iron rod held in place by an asphalt or bitumen plug. In a 1940 paper, Koenig proposed something startling. He suggested the jar was a galvanic cell, an ancient battery, perhaps used to electroplate gold onto silver. The jars are usually dated to the Parthian period, roughly 250 before the Common Era to 224 of the Common Era, or the Sassanid era that followed. And here's what keeps this case alive while the others fade. The electrochemistry actually functions. Fill a replica with an acidic liquid like vinegar or grape juice, and it produces about half a volt to 2 volts. In the 1970s, the Egyptologist Arne Egebrecht reportedly built a replica that deposited a thin layer of silver. So is it really a battery? Many scholars say no and offer a quieter explanation. The archaeologist Elizabeth Stone, an expert on Iraq, argues the jars are simply storage vessels. Similar bitumen stoppered jars from the nearby site of Seleucia once held rolled scrolls of papyrus or parchment, which decayed over the centuries, leaving only the metal fittings behind. The corrosion on the iron rod on this view came from organic contents, not from a deliberate acid. Crucially, no wires, no conductors, and no electroplated artifacts have ever been found in association with these jars. To use them as real batteries, ancient makers would have needed to connect cells in series and understand circuits, and there is no other trace of such knowledge anywhere in the record. In 2005, a popular television team built replicas that produced around 4 volts when linked together, proving the principle while finding no supporting context. So weigh it carefully. The mainstream view leans towards scroll storage jars, the simplest explanation that fits the regional finds. A lost technology view says these are genuine ancient batteries, hinting at forgotten engineering. And a middle view says the jars could generate current incidentally, even if that was never their purpose. The original artifact was reportedly looted or lost during the sacking of the National Museum of Iraq in 2003, a real loss of real heritage. Koenig's idea has never been outright disproven, and that lingering possibility is exactly why the Baghdad Battery is the most respectable object on this entire list. The next find is far less defensible, a flawless skull of crystal with a discovery story that the paper trail quietly demolishes. Number 9. The Mitchell-Hedges Crystal Skull. It is a human skull carved from a single block of clear quartz, life-sized, polished to a flawless shine, with a separate lower jaw that detaches. It takes its name from the British adventurer Frederick Albert Mitchell-Hedges and his adopted daughter Anna. The legend says that in 1924, on her 17th birthday, Anna found the skull beneath a collapsed altar in the Maya ruins of Lubantun, in what is now Belize. It is a beautiful story. It also falls apart under documents. Frederick Mitchell-Hedges did not even mention the skull in the first edition of his 1954 memoir Danger My Ally, and auction records show the skull was actually bought by Mitchell-Hedges at a Sotheby's sale in London in 1943 from a dealer named Sidney Burney. That is why scholars often call it the Burney skull. The romantic jungle discovery and the London auction cannot both be true. For decades, believers leaned on a 1970 study by the Hewlett-Packard Company, which reportedly found the skull was carved against the natural axis of the crystal, something they said should have shattered it, and therefore could not have been done with hand tools. Then, in 2008, the Smithsonian researcher Jane McLaren Walsh examined crystal skulls under an electron microscope. On the famous skulls she studied, she found telltale marks of rotary cutting wheels, modern lapidary tools, not pre-Columbian techniques. The crystal skulls held by the British Museum and by the Quai Branly Museum in Paris were both shown to be 19th century European fabrications. Many trace back to a single French antiquities dealer, Eugène Bobon, active in the 1860s through the 1880s. The quartz in the Mitchell-Hedges skull likely came from Brazil or Madagascar, not from Mesoamerica at all. Ancient Mesoamerican cultures did carve quartz, but they never produced realistic, anatomically detailed human skulls like this one. And the excavation records from Lubantun, dug by Thomas Gann, and later by the British Museum's Thomas Athol Joyce, contain no skull. The grander legend that there are 13 crystal skulls which must be reunited to save humanity is a 20th century New Age invention, with no ancient source. The skull's fame only grew when it inspired the 2008 film Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Anna kept it until her death in 2007 and never permitted fully destructive testing. So the theories settle. The mainstream view says a modern carved fake, likely 19th century. A psychic artifact view assigns it mysterious powers, and an Atlantis or Maya view claims lost ancient craft. No authenticated crystal skull has ever come from a documented dig. which leaves one last object, and this one flips the entire genre on its head, because it is real. Number 10. The Antikythera Mechanism. In 1901, sponge divers working a shipwreck off the small Greek island of Antikythera brought up a corroded lump of bronze. The wreck itself dates to roughly 70 to 60 before the Common Era, and the device inside may have been built around 150 to 100 before the Common Era. At first it looked like nothing, just 82 broken green fragments. Then, in 1902, the archaeologist Valerios Stais noticed a gear wheel embedded in the rock. That single gear opened a door no one expected. The mechanism contained at least 30 meshing bronze gears, some with finely cut triangular teeth, working together as an analog computer. It modeled the motions of the sun, the moon, and very likely the 5 planets known to the ancients. A dial on the front showed the zodiac and an Egyptian calendar. Dials on the back tracked the cycles of the months and the timing of eclipses. It captured the 19-year Metonic cycle, which aligns the solar year with lunar months, and the 223-month Saros cycle used to predict eclipses. A small sphere likely showed the phase of the moon, and a clever pin and slot arrangement even reproduced the way the moon speeds up and slows down across the sky. The first great study came from Derek de Solla Price, whose 1974 work, Gears from the Greeks, revealed the depth of the machine. From 2005 onward, the Antikythera Mechanism research project used X-ray computed tomography to peer inside the fragments, uncovering thousands of tiny hidden characters of Greek text. Researchers including Tony Freeth and Mike Edmonds published reconstructions in the journal Nature beginning in 2006. Those inscriptions act as a built-in user's manual, naming planets and astronomical events. The device even tracked the 4-year cycle of the Pan-Hellenic Games, including the Olympics. And here is the part that should stop you. Nothing of comparable mechanical complexity appears again in the human record until the astronomical clocks of 14th century Europe, more than 1,000 years later. The Antikythera Mechanism implies an entire lost tradition of Hellenistic precision engineering, possibly connected to thinkers like Archimedes or Hipparchus. It is sinister only in one specific sense. By the old assumptions about what ancient people could build, it should not exist. Yet it does. It is housed in the National Archaeological Museum of Athens, and mainstream science fully accepts it. That is the crucial difference. This is the rare out-of-place artifact that turned out to be exactly as impossible and as real as it first seemed. Which raises the obvious question: why is this one embraced while the other 9 are doubted or dismissed? The answer lies in method, in the unglamorous machinery of authentication that separates the Antikythera Mechanism from everything before it. The first test is provenance. A real find has a documented spot in the ground, recorded as it is lifted. A doubtful one arrives through a dealer, or a shop, or a story that begins, "Someone sold it to me." The second test is context. Genuine archaeology reads the layers of soil, the stratigraphy, around an object, because the datable context dates the find. Surface discoveries and private collections lose that anchor entirely. The third test is dating itself, and its limits. Radiocarbon dating works only on organic material, which is why the Ica Stones, being solid andesite, can never be carbon dated. And the great recurring trap, seen in the Coso Artifact and the London Hammer, is confusing the age of a concretion with the age of the rock it grew from. The fourth test is peer review and independent replication, the demand that other scientists examine and confirm a claim. The fifth is access for destructive testing, the willingness to let a laboratory cut, scrape, and analyze, which fakes so often avoid. Tool mark microscopy, the very method that exposed the crystal skull, can reveal modern rotary wheels invisible to the eye. Material sourcing can show that quartz came from Brazil, not Mexico, or that an alloy contains industrial metals. Chain of custody and museum records can confirm or destroy a discovery story. And notice how often the doubtful finds share one feature. The object is lost. The Coso Artifact is gone. The Dropa discs never appeared. The Baghdad Battery vanished in 2003. A lost object can never be retested, and that is not a coincidence. It is a shield. The same tool, computed tomography, that exposed the assembled mummies also revealed the genuine hidden complexity of Antikythera. The method does not start from belief or doubt. It follows the evidence, and it lets the object speak. It is worth asking a blunt question about every item on this list. Who benefits? Follow the incentives, and the sinister finds start to make a different kind of sense. Money comes first. The Ica Stones and the Nazca bodies both feed tourist economies, with museums and attractions built directly on the mystery. In Peru, where selling real antiquities is illegal, carving convincing fakes became a legal and profitable workaround, which is precisely what Basilio Ushuaia described. Looting pressure compounds it, as real graves in Peru and real sites in Iraq are stripped for objects that can be sold or repurposed. Then comes media spectacle. In an age of views and clicks, a three-fingered body before a Congress generates hundreds of millions of impressions, and the people who present it gain fame and influence regardless of whether it is real. Belief systems supply their own motives. Creationists have reason to collapse deep time, so a hammer in ancient rock or a human riding a dinosaur serves a purpose. The ancient astronaut publishing world, shaped by writers like Erich von Däniken, turns every anomaly into a book. The New Age market gives crystal skulls a spiritual price tag, and the modern internet adds a new laundering process, where a satire article from a site like World News Daily Report is stripped of its joke and recirculated as fact. Underneath all of it runs nationalism and contested heritage, the pride and pain of who owns the past. And threaded through every case is the most powerful sales pitch of all. The phrase, "they don't want you to see this," sells regardless of evidence, because distrust of authority is a feeling, not a fact. The real cost falls on genuine archaeology, on looted sites, and on indigenous remains treated as props in someone else's story. Here is the uncomfortable truth that makes these stories so sticky. Almost every hoax on this list is built on top of something genuinely real and genuinely strange. The Nazca mummies exploit the fact that real ancient cultures did reshape human skulls, binding infants' heads into elongated forms, so an altered skull is not, by itself, absurd. The Dropa story leans on the Bai disc, a real and ancient Chinese ring of carved stone. The Klerksdorp Spheres and the London hammer ride on the reality of concretions, which truly do form strange rounded shapes and truly do cement objects into stone. The Baghdad Battery sits on genuine Parthian metalworking, sophisticated enough that an electroplating idea is at least imaginable. The crystal skull trades on the fact that Mesoamericans really did carve quartz with remarkable skill, and the giant skeleton myth feeds on the real sophistication of the mound builders, whose earthworks were so impressive that racist 19th century minds refused to credit the people who made them. Even Antikythera, the one that is real, proves the deepest point of all. Sometimes the ancient world genuinely was more advanced than we assumed. That is why a kernel of truth makes a hoax durable. The fake is never floating free. It is anchored to a real anomaly, a real material, a real culture, and that anchor is what lets it hold. The lesson is not that wonder is foolish. It is that real archaeology is already stranger, richer, and more surprising than the forgeries draped over it. The truth does not need the costume. None of this means every question is closed. Honest skepticism leaves real mysteries standing, and it is worth naming them so we do not mistake doubt for certainty. The Antikythera Mechanism still has no known predecessor. We have the finished machine, dazzling in its complexity, but almost nothing of the tradition that must have produced it. The workshops, the earlier prototypes, the teachers who passed the craft along. Where did that knowledge come from? And where did it go? The Baghdad Battery still has no settled purpose. The scroll storage explanation is strong, but it is not proven, and the electrochemistry stubbornly works. In the Nazca region, real tombs lie unexcavated, and looting damages the genuine record even as fakes flood the market. So the authentic archaeology there remains incomplete. The sacking of the National Museum of Iraq in 2003 was a real loss of real artifacts that may never be recovered or studied. And the limits of current dating mean that some surface finds genuinely cannot be pinned in time with the tools we have today. These are honest, open questions, and they are different in kind from manufactured ones. "We don't know yet" is a normal sentence in science. It is not the same as they're hiding it. The healthiest stance is a skepticism that stays curious, that keeps asking, that follows new evidence wherever it leads, without leaping to a conclusion the evidence has not earned. Mystery and hoax can look alike from a distance. Up close, method tells them apart. So why do these sinister finds refuse to fade, even after the confessions, the auction records, and the lab reports? Part of the answer is psychological. Stories of suppressed knowledge are deeply satisfying because they cast the listener as someone who sees what the powerful want hidden. Distrust of institutions, museums, governments, and universities gives that feeling fertile ground, and the internet pours fuel on it, spreading every claim of vanished evidence faster than any correction can follow. It does not help that history contains real cover-ups, real frauds, and real lost artifacts, which prime us to believe the next one too. And there is one more reason, the most interesting of all. Antikythera is real. One genuine, astonishing, impossible-seeming object came up out of the sea and turned out to be exactly what it appeared to be. That single authentic anomaly keeps a door open for all the others, a reason to wonder whether the next strange thing might also be true. The difference that matters is the difference between asking questions and inventing answers. Curiosity is the engine of every real discovery on this list, including the one that was real. The trick is to aim that curiosity at evidence, rather than spectacle, at the patient work of provenance and testing, rather than the thrill of a body on a table or a story about giants in the ground. Genuine discovery is slower, harder, and quieter than the forgeries. But it is also, in the end, the only kind that lasts. So the next time something arrives, wrapped in the words, "They don't want you to see this," weigh the object, not the whisper, and let the evidence have the final word.